concepts. One of my biggest bugbears with kind of tech companies, or now it's everything's AI, is when I get propositioned in the line of work that I do with somebody who offers you a solution, and it's a solution that's going to fix everything. They've not asked you what you want fixing, but it's going to fix everything.
Definitely. And the thing is as well, I think, exactly what you said there, you have these agency workers that are coming in, they know your patients and everything else. That then becomes a little bit counterproductive to what you're trying to do with your perm staff as well, because what happens is you're using these agency staff all the time, who 9 times out of 10 are getting paid more than your substantive staff.
Well, to summarise, why Temployer? What it is?
Temployer. I think ultimately Temployer has been designed for the private healthcare sector. It's been designed to allow you to manage now your whole workforce, because ultimately, we've got an EROS to that slots onto the front end of the product, but ultimately to really manage your flexible workforce.
So I've just been speaking to Ben from Temployer about how tech can provide solutions in workforce management. Let's get it stuck in. So do you want to start by telling us a little bit about how you got to be doing that job and a bit about yourself?
Yep, no problem. So I'm recruitment through and through, really.
Yep.
So I started my career agency side recruitment, had a care company, care recruitment company, many moons ago. And then I went internal.
You ran a care company?
I ran a care company.
Oh,
well, not a care company, a care recruitment company.
Oh, okay, cool.
So care recruitment.
Right, yeah.
So I've been agency side. Then I went internal with Four Seasons Healthcare as their regional recruitment manager. Did that for a number of years, and then moved into sort of mental health with Elysium as their head of resourcing for the UK. At that time, in fact, while we were at Four Seasons Healthcare, I was introduced to a piece of tech, Temployer. It was an agency at that stage. It was an online agency, and I then took that when I went to Elysium. And that's where we sort of we created a workforce management piece of tech alongside them while I was at Elysium as head of resourcing, and then ultimately I went to Temployer to work for them, and that's where we're at now.
All right, that is really good in terms of context. One of my biggest bugbears with kind of tech companies, or now it's everything's AI, is when I get propositioned in the line of work that I do with somebody who offers you a solution, and it's a solution that's going to fix everything. They've not asked you what you want fixing, but it's going to fix everything. And then I'm like, I do a little bit of digging. I'm thinking, so where's this come from? And if the answer is, well, I'm tech and I built this to fix your problem, I start wondering a little bit. If it comes from someone who's been there, been the client, felt the pain, and has got involved with something like you have, which has got a solution to a problem that they've felt, it makes all the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes 100%. I mean, I think, the tech stuff, while I know some of it, we've got a tech team that deals with that. I think, my the onus on my career ever since sort of moving in-house has been to reduce agency spend. Have better quality of carers looking after patients. That was my ethos when I was in resourcing, and that's still my ethos now. Even with tech and with Temployer and what we do, what I'm always trying to make sure is your patients are getting the best quality carers around, and we just help that. We just give you the tech to facilitate that.
Yeah, so I've been there as well, as you know. So I've been head of resourcing for a healthcare company, and I started out with agency was a bad thing, and it was kind of like over my dead body would we use agency, and everything we could do is to reduce temporary agency workers and the cost and all that kind of stuff. But it soon came to light. Probably took me a couple of years where I was thinking, actually, they are a massively important part of our workforce. And actually, without them, certain sites at certain times can grind to a halt, can't they? So I think it's just worth exploring that a little bit, because it's massive, isn't it? A temporary agency, let's just say how it is, in a big healthcare organisation is necessary.
100%. They should be a partner to those organisations. I think there's a massive, like you said, there's this massive thought process that agency is expensive, it's bad, but that is the case with some agencies. They can be expensive, they can be bad, they can fall asleep on shift and all that kind of stuff. But the good agencies, the ones that you should be partnering with, are the ones that the ones that really add to your strategy.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, it's cheaper to have agencies in the background than it is to maintain massive banks of people sometimes, because you've got to take care of their training, you've got to take care of their compliance and everything else. You may as well just have an agency in the background that's there just to help you out when you need to.
Yeah. So it's a really good point actually in terms of bank. So again, having done the job recruiting, attracting bank workers, as I say it now, is not too difficult.
No.
Attracting bank workers is actually pretty easy. So you've got people who want to choose their shifts.
Yep.
They need a bit of flexibility. They're open to work. So getting them in your ATS, getting through onboarding is a bit challenging because you've still got to invest all that time. But the real difficulty is then making sure that you keep them all engaged.
Yep.
You're actually using them and giving them shifts. So the best I've seen it on a lower level is where you've got a brilliant bank coordinator who's basically got a WhatsApp group.
Yep.
And is able to fill the shifts where so somebody doesn't turn up for a shift or someone's going to be off last minute and they've got an engaged group, but that's kind of for one location or one region.
Yep.
And then, for a big company that serves the whole of the UK, you need to then clone that person probably 10, 15 times,
Yep.
which becomes expensive. And then how do you control it and how do you keep the KPIs? And I suppose that's the whole point of what you do, isn't it?
Yeah, to some extent. I think to sort of go back a little bit on what you said at the beginning in terms of bank is easy to recruit and stuff. I'll most probably sort of say I don't think that's the full story.
Yeah.
I think, and this is sort of putting my recruitment head back on. I think bank workers are still a third cousin to the recruitment process. I think, and what I mean by that is, if that made any sense at all,
it's going to
what I mean by that is, so many organisations in the care sector, we'll talk about that for now, ultimately recruit substantive staff, full-timers, part-timers and everything else. But ultimately, they don't actively recruit their bank. What they do is somebody comes in for an interview, they're not quite right for a full-time role or a part-time role, and they're offered bank. And those people, like you said, then get onboarded, massive cost. Get inducted, massive cost, and then leave because they never ever pick up a shift. I think there's more organisations can do around actually actively recruiting their bank. If I'm being honest, and going out looking for people that are specific to that. But then, once you've got them, it's about using them. It's about fairness. I think managers have a lot of pressure on them. And I think ultimately what happens with that pressure is they like what they know. So they end up then just going to the staff that have worked there, work with their patients or their residents, and that's the easy way to go. And then after that, the easy place to go is agency. So actually, those bank workers that you've recruited never actually pick up a shift. We try and take the bias out of that with our system, and software and tech can help you take that bias out.
Got you. So because quite often high use of agency, I think from my point of view, comes from two things. One is it's very easy to use. So if I've met with a number of agencies that will provide temporary workers, and when I was doing the job as a head of resourcing, and I was blown away with how much they knew about the patients, service users, about the wards, about the managers, like more than I did, more than my team did, and they weren't even working in the company. And I was like, well, this makes sense. Then they've got an in to the people who are actually feeling the pain of so-and-so's not going to turn up on shift, and all they've got to do is click, and you've got someone in. Yes, it comes at a cost. And then at a higher level, when you add up all those costs, it's scary, not sustainable, all the rest of it. So making it easy is the key, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the thing is as well, I think, exactly what you said there, you've had these agency workers that are coming in, they know your patients and everything else. That then becomes a little bit counterproductive to what you're trying to do with your perm staff as well, because what happens is you're using these agency staff all the time, who 9 times out of 10 are getting paid more than your substantive staff.
Driving nice big
they're
Beamers,
picking their hours. They're having all the benefits of being able to not work weekends, all that kind of stuff. And that then creates animosity with your substantive staff, which so ultimately by using too much agency all the time, you've got this issue then that your staff are going to get a bee in their bonnet about it, and they'll end up leaving and so on and so forth. So it's just a situation you just don't want to find yourself in.
Yeah, so I think there is a fine mix, isn't there? So I think what we're saying is that having a temporary agency solution is probably essential to a big care company.
100%.
Definitely essential, not probably. Having control of how you use that is essential so that it doesn't run away with itself, and so that you keep that good mix and you're giving great care to the service users. So that's the thing.
Exactly.
So before we dig into kind of your solution, are you able to give us some context of like the legacy companies? So I've had some exposure to it, the neutral vendors, and I've seen quite a few of them, and I've never completely understood them, and I've always thought there's something dodgy in this. So what is the market like? And how's it changed?
I suppose Temployer comes in sort of, we've got two sort of core products. We've got the product that allows you to manage your flexible workforce, which is your bank, your overtime, and then ultimately your conversations with your agencies and your communication with agencies. And then you've got that e-roster piece that sort of bolts onto the front. I think if we're talking about the legacy companies when it comes to the e-roster stuff, they're the companies that are, basically been built for the NHS. Yeah. Ultimately they've been built for the NHS, and most people that will be listening to this will know who those companies are, and they expect you to have every part of your tech stack managed by them. There's no element of interoperability. It's very difficult to be able to.
I'm glad you said that word.
Interoperability,
because that was in here as one of the points, and I've crossed it out for. I'm definitely not saying that word, so I'm glad. Anyway.
Well, yeah. So sorry, so they're always against doing integrations with other pieces of tech and stuff like that. And obviously, we live in a tech-rich world. Those tech stacks need to be able to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So you've got those companies that just basically expect you to take everything, and those ones are the ones that, those companies are the ones that the private sector are bringing in now to manage their rosters and everything else. And it's just not working because, staffing in the NHS versus staffing in, in the private sector is very, very different.
Yeah.
And then when you come on to what you're talking about then in terms of agency management and, the pieces of tech that do that and the companies that do that, the neutral vendor is most probably the go-to for a lot of companies. And I understand this. You don't need to have a procurement function that are dealing directly with agencies, dealing with the contracts. To some extent, you don't need a finance part of your business to deal with the invoicing that's coming from those agencies.
Yeah.
The neutral vendor solution takes care of all that for you. But as we keep talking about and we keep coming back to is the fact that agencies, are really, really important. So you don't want to, annoy your agencies.
Yeah.
And from my experience, and I'm sure there's some, better companies out there, but from my experience, neutral vends push down the rate for those companies. They make agencies agree to rates that they usually wouldn't agree to just to get the volume. So then what that means is you're most probably getting a quality of care worker, of nurse, from these companies that aren't fit for purpose, at your business. So it's great that you've got somebody managing all that for you, but actually, I think there's a question mark over the quality that's coming from them.
Yeah. Okay. So, I understand that, but for our audience then, or people who don't necessarily get it, so in layman's terms, when I was working at Signet Healthcare, I was part of some of the selection process for agencies, and the procurement team were outstanding at selecting their agencies. They had a really strict criteria. I learned a lot from that process, and they basically gained complete control. They had a tiered system, and it was brilliant. And so they pulled away the control from the individual sites so that it didn't spiral, and they had everything in place. And so for them to use a third party to then go and manage it, they'd lose that control, wouldn't they?
Yeah, they'd lose that control. They would most probably not have full choice over the agencies that they want to use, because the ones that they could be using that have got an integrity and they've got a price point that they're not going to drop past wouldn't join that neutral vend solution to provide to them.
And then when we're talking about the legacy systems that want everything in one place, are we talking like HR systems as an example?
Yeah, well, there's a bit of everything, I suppose. I think there are companies out there that want you to have their HR system. They want you to have their their e-roster.
Yeah.
They then want you to have their payroll system, and they want you just to be completely tied in to their ecosystem, which makes sense from them from a business perspective. But it's it's like that old saying, isn't it? Master. Jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah,
and I think that's the issue.
Yeah.
With
so a lot of those big systems, again, this is just from my point of view or from my experience, they've been built out of being very good at one part of it.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've seen a system in my world where it's HR system and it comes with an ATS, and I've been in recruitment, and it's like, you're gonna have to use this ATS because we're looking at the system, and I've looked at the ATS and gone, wow, that really can't. So, and I think that the dreamlight scenario is that you just use one system and it works brilliantly for everything. But the reality is, it's probably brilliant at one thing. The e-rostering might not be great. The ATS might not be great, but there are ways that you can plug in a separate ATS,
exactly,
separate e-rostering system, Temployer, right?
Exactly.
So, and I think that one of the biggest kind of blockers, I would imagine, to a company taking in these different systems is the thinking around integrations, because integrations is massive, isn't it? And the testing of it and making sure they work. So do you do all the integrations? Do you take all of that on?
Yeah, so we have an in-house team that take care of the integration. So we'll work with you. When people ask me about integrations, it's a two-way street. It's about what we can do, and we can certainly help you integrate. But again, it's that other company that we're integrating with, and that's where you sometimes get a little bit of pushback. So that's where we try and sort of hold your hand through that whole process, to make sure that it works. Because it just makes life easier. If you've got a full integration, it makes life easier for you. And more systems should talk to other systems at the end of the day. And I know the NHS now, a big buzzword of theirs is interoperability. To be fair, most probably stole it from that. And they are keen that any tech, solution that they take for any part of that sort of life cycle is, can talk to the one before it and the one after it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's just say scenario wise then. So I'm a healthcare organisation, and I've gone through a procurement process or whatever that is to pick the temporary agencies that I want to partner with. Big emphasis on partner. Yeah. So I've got that control, got all the costs sorted. We've got bank pools are probably not being utilised properly, and we've got a big focus on permanent recruitment. But we've got loads of sites all over the UK. Meet with somebody like Temployer, and I'm like, well, this would be the dream, but where do you begin? Because is it a case of you bring Temployer in, you've got to plug all sites in, or how does it begin?
So first and foremost, and certainly for us, we want you to be confident that the system is going to work. So we would give you that system to use in a couple of your sites on a trial basis.
Right.
We like to work with you to roll that out properly. So we'd ask for exposure to your finance team, to your procurement team, to your operations team.
Yeah.
So then and we'd ask for somebody to, to be a point of contact in those elements when it comes to getting the system in. We'd then train out that team, and we'd give them access to the system. We plug in your agencies at the back end. Your agencies need to have all their compliance for those individual workers, and then your operations team can approve those. So that full compliance. So that when you're using Temployer, 100% compliance. If a worker goes out of date, if something goes out of date for a worker, we turn them off. We take them out of any future shifts, and they need to be re-uploaded. And then we would just let you run with it. So we'd plug in your bank workers, we'd plug in your overtime staff to be able to pick up overtime shifts, and then we would teach your sites how to put those shifts out.
Right.
In a nutshell, then they would put those shifts out into the system. Those shifts would then send to your bank team and your overtime to pick up those shifts first and foremost. If they don't pick it up, we can create banks over locations. So if you've got 5 sites, let's say in Warrington, we can put all those 5 sites bank into one pool as well. So then the system would then push to your sort of your shared bank, give them a chance to pick up that shift, and then only at that point where it's not being picked up by any of that, it can push to the agencies to fill the shift with their workers. Where we sort of are very different to anything else in the market is, and again this goes back to my my philosophy of you need to maximize your bank, you need to supercharge your bank and make sure that your staff are getting your residents are getting the best possible staff for them, which are the ones that know them, the ones that have worked with them before. We then allow your staff to claim back those shifts from agencies. So as an example, Rowan, if you were coming off a shift tomorrow and you decided you wanted to pick up shift next week, when you log into the system, if that shift's available, obviously you'll be able to pick it up. That's what the system does, at its basic level. If there's no shifts available, but there are shifts at the same time, but they're covered by agency workers, we'll show you those shifts as open shifts.
And you can take them.
And you can take them. And then the agency get an email to say thank you but no thank you, and your worker then gets to work that shift. That alone is a huge. I mean that tool alone ultimately, makes the system cost neutral.
So for employees then,
Yep.
as you just described in that scenario, there's a massive benefit there. That's brilliant. It's almost, and is it like an app to them?
Yeah, it's an app.
So they basically got access to an app where they go, look, I'm going to put in another shift, something has changed in my week or whatever, and they can go in there, and actually it gives them a priority over the temporary agency shift. Therefore, they're engaged, they're reaping a benefit of that extra shift and saving the company money.
Exactly.
What are the benefits for the temporary agencies then?
So from that perspective, there isn't. But, we've most probably got about 400 agencies that are currently using our system.
Yep.
They understand that, staffing, is expensive. They understand that their clients, and again, it comes down to this partnership element that we talk about and we've spoken about a couple of times. They understand that, that there's not a limitless amount of cash.
Yeah.
So they're just happy to be in the mix.
Yeah.
And ultimately what this does, it reduces the amount of agencies that you're using. You're only using serious ones, so they're still getting enough work.
Yeah.
But they understand that ultimately they may lose those shifts.
But sorry, the other thing is, so if you without the tech supporting this, essentially as an agency, you're on a list, the PSL, aren't you? And you might get shifts, and you might not. Whereas if you're in the tech, then it's like it's more official, isn't it? You are definitely in the mix. You are going to get shifts, and it's going to be official. It's going to be measured. It's going to be monitored. Does it help with the invoicing process as well?
Yep. So we hold all the rate cards in the system. So we hold the rate cards. We also have tiering in the system. You spoke about tiering before, so we can tier. Where you've got bank workers and perm workers that can claim back shifts off agencies, we can also allow your tier 1 agencies to claim back shifts off tier 2 agencies, and so on and so forth. So we can make sure that you get the best value, best value staffing at all times.
Wow. Okay. So in a way, there's a clear benefit to employees, clear benefit. There's a benefit to agencies, definitely. Yeah. But it also keeps them on their toes.
Keeps them on their toes. And then to answer the question that you asked before, we hold the rate cards in the system, and then basically, and certainly some of our clients use it this way. One in particular, they work on the ethos that if it's not on Temployer, it didn't happen. So agencies have to approve their shift once it's worked. Yeah. In Temployer. The site then needs to approve that shift as well once it's worked in Temployer, and as long as all those shifts are approved, it then goes to a report on a weekly basis with a monetary amount that needs to be invoiced against. So it just absolutely streamlines that process. So gone are the days of having thousands of individual invoices for 1 shift, 3 shifts, 4 shifts, coming in and having a team sat at head office going, yep, that's correct, yep, that's right, oh, that's wrong, and all that kind of stuff. This is 1 invoice per site per week.
So in terms of a healthcare organisation, though, there's benefits everywhere. But what's the standout benefit in terms of having a tech solution to support all of what we've just talking about?
Yeah. So I think it's threefold, I would say, with Temployer. I think firstly, claiming back of shifts.
Yeah.
I think that is really, really important from a value perspective, from a quality perspective. That function is huge. I mean, you've been around care for a long time. I've been around care for a long time. As well as I do. Again, and some businesses do it different. Some managers do it different. But genuinely, managers have to staff their sites so that they're compliant with CQC, that there's enough people to look after their residents. And sometimes the easiest way to do that is to go down that agency route. You know, and you may have a huge amount of overtime. You might have a substantive staff that want to pick up overtime. You might have staff there that are bank workers and they want to pick up shifts. But a lot of the times, once that shift's gone to agency, it's gone to agency. Yeah. People argue, oh no, I'll ring the agency, I'll cancel it. It never happens that way. So that claiming back of shifts is huge. The second benefit, the second sort of core benefit there, I would say comes with the compliance. So, we've all watched the different programs on TV about sites, about care, care providers that have had agency staff come in that weren't compliant, that weren't they weren't the person that they were supposed to have in caring for their staff. What our system does is it ensures that there's full compliance. We work with you to build what you expect from a compliance perspective, but it could be site-based, so if one site needs one training, we can make the system do that for you. So from a compliance perspective, it's huge. We turn off anybody has anything that runs out.
Yeah.
And then the final piece I'd say, which is a core benefit, is what we spoke about there in terms of invoicing.
Yeah.
We streamline that invoicing process for you.
Yeah.
And it comes down to that thing again. Agencies. There's horror stories. Agencies just sending staff on a daily basis to each hospital, just for a chance that their agency. You don't know who you're letting in. You don't know who's working. It's causing a chaos. At your receptions. Temployer stops all of that for you, and then. And I know I sort of said there was 3, but there are some intrinsic benefits we found as well.
Yeah.
One of the big ones being retention.
Yep.
Temployer massively helps with your retention, because ultimately it's a first come first serve, and there's no bias involved.
Yeah.
So managers that have had some sort of bias, and I'm not saying it's negative bias or positive bias, but there has been some bias.
Yeah.
With the way that they choose who to give shifts to, who does the overtime, what bank workers come in.
Yeah. So you've got the control. You know that it's fair. All the other benefits that you talked about as well, but the fact that it's transparent. So there's no way, there's no hiding places. There's no way that there can be any kind of backhanders or anything. All right. So going back to the scenario, so healthcare organisation, you've got 2 sites that are, let's just say, problematic or whatever. So you want to control costs, control agency usage, and all that kind of stuff. How do you plug in then? So is the integration easy?
So the integration is certainly not taken care of by me.
Yeah.
I can tell you that right now. It takes a bit of work.
Yeah.
There are touch points between systems, that need to be looked at. But it's certainly achievable with most systems. Sometimes you get companies that push back.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to integrate with you. They've got a module that does something similar. To what you do, they don't want to work with you. So you need to have companies that are willing to, to talk and sort of deliver those integrations. But ultimately there should be no issue integrating with any. Open APIs. We have them. A lot of the companies we work with say they have them. But ultimately it's about getting into a room with those guys and having that conversation.
Okay, so essentially, scenario based. So if I'm that healthcare organisation and I'm interested in what we're talking about today, and I'm thinking, all right, does it start with like a discovery call? So this is, let's just put it all out on the table. These are the problems that we face, or the things that we want to fix. Size of the workforce, size of the bank pool, the agencies we use, all that kind of stuff. And then we talk about the systems that we use currently, and then there's a bit of discovery. Can we integrate? How long will it take? Are there any blockers? So how long does that kind of process take?
So what I would always recommend, even once we've done that discovery call, once we've maybe had a follow-up call after that, if there is interest in the system, I'd say let's trial it. Let's do a proof of concept. Because I'm confident that if you use the system and then you start to see the benefits of the system, you'll want that system, across the board. But once we start talking about the integration stuff, you're looking at about a 3-month period, I'd say, to get those integrations scoped, delivered, and then to start rolling that system out.
And then, so then in that scenario, then I've got my finance guy on my shoulder going, well, when are we going to start seeing benefits from that? How long does that usually take?
You'll start seeing individual site benefits straight away.
Really?
Our rollout I think, you mentioned blockers before. Companies have been doing things their own way for a long time. They've got processes in place. Chances are, if they're not using any tech at all, and then a lot of care is, we know that. We know a lot of care still uses, spreadsheets to do their rosters. They still use WhatsApp groups. They still call around and everything else. So I can guarantee that those companies are most probably got about, depending on how the size of the company, but you're most probably looking at, for every 2 sites, there's a different process in there. So, when we roll out, we do it properly. And it can take a while if it's a big business, because we want to make sure it lands. And we sort of will support you in any way you want. We can be quite hands off, and we can just teach you how to roll out the system out, or where it's worked best is where we've got really involved in that in that rollout and held your hand sort of at every stage. So, it can take a while to roll out, but you will start to see benefits extremely quickly. I mean, and we'll talk a bit more about it in the next episode. But we've helped one business go from and again, I'm not going to sit here and go, yeah, Temployer's helped this business go from sort of circa back end of 26% agency, to 6% agency over the course of the last 2 years, but Temployer's facilitated it. There's been a load of other stuff going on at the same time, and we'll help you with that as well. So, we'll sort of liaise with your head of recruitment, because ultimately I've done it before, and I did it when I was at Elysium, and I'll help you supercharge, your recruitment of your bank. We'll support you with that, and we'll tell you that, if we're going to roll out to, site X, Y, and Z in 3 months' time, now's the time to start doing the recruitment for the bank, because then once Temployer's in and you've got those bank workers in, you're going to then start to see those benefits straight away. So it's a collaborative approach. However, when you then look at RE roster as well, and again, like I said, a lot of companies are still using, the sort of the implementation of that is a lot easier. It's a lot quicker, because we're actually taking your whole staffing process, from start to finish. So all your staff in, then it gets pushed into Temployer to manage your flexible workforce, and then it comes back into your roster, your re-roster, as a filled shift. That's a lot quicker. And we can implement that, much quicker.
And you can do that separately on the system, right? Okay.
So it's fully modular, so you can completely do that separately.
So just going back to something you said before, you mentioned spreadsheets and companies still using that. It kind of blows my mind that it's 2025 and I've been working in healthcare definitely more than 10 years. So many things haven't changed, and so many things are in fact even worse than they were 10 years ago with a lot of companies, because it feels like there's a lot of talk about making changes. There's a lot of talk about new tech, and then people change in companies or the government do something different, and it's like it resets right at the beginning of the conversation again. But the reality is that people listening to this, some companies listening to this, will be filling their shifts using spreadsheets, with agencies on a PSL, which is basically looking like any agency that approached you and said, we've got staff, add them on the PSL, sending out shifts to all of them. Like you said, agency workers turning up in their droves, in their Range Rovers, and then in their droves. Are there any shifts available? It's scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you think the end point is caring for probably the most vulnerable people in the country.
It's scary. It's scary. And I think from my experience, what I've seen is, I think a lot of decisions about the tech that people are trying to use in these organizations, I think a lot of these decisions are made at head office. I think, and what happens there is, they see a all singing, all dancing piece of kit that's come from the NHS. That was built in the NHS, or it was built in a different sector. That's the other thing as well. There's a lot out there that was built in different sectors, and they see this piece of kit and it's all got all the bells and whistles and everything else, and then they try and implement it. Because I think these companies do try, and there's lots of companies out there that have tried to implement different sort of pieces of tech, from a staffing perspective, and it just doesn't work, because at an operations level and on the ground level, they're too complicated. The beauty of a spreadsheet is it's one input. It's like, and if you've got somebody that can build some really intelligent spreadsheets, but it's one input. Joe Bloggs is working, bang, nice and easy. To do that within some of these pieces of tech, it's 4 clicks, 5 clicks to do that. You've got to go in, what level is that care worker? What band? Actually, that's an NHS thing. You don't need a band in a private, but you still need to put in some sort. All of them aren't fit for purpose for the private care sector, which is why we're trying to change that a little bit now. And I think that's why they failed. We've successfully launched Temployer now to over 250 sites across the UK, and it's been successful. And what I mean by that is, you would expect when you have those kind of and talking to anybody that's listening to this that have tried to implement pieces of tech and everything else, as well as I do, that it's not a smooth process. You get pushback at every stage of that process. You get pushback from home managers. You get pushback from the end user. All that kind of stuff. with Temployer, and I mean, you'll have to take me at my word, you know, but we've never had that pushback. The way we implement, the way we deliver it, the way we are receptive to changing things, you know, because we have, you know, certain flexibility with our system so we can make it fit for purpose for individual businesses. We've never had that pushback. It's been a massively positive experience. And again, you know, we'll talk to Signet about that next week, and you know, and we've delivered something to Signet that, you know, hasn't been delivered to them before, and that's a, you know, piece of, you know, workforce management tech that's been really embraced by them.
So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation when we talk to the folks at Signet, and we essentially go through how it's worked for them. I mean, it builds a bit of a case study and a real life overview of how it works. One thing that probably tees up that episode that you said a minute ago, you said 26% agency to 6%.
Yeah, that's
massive, isn't it?
It's massive. Company. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, that's all Temployer. It's not. I mean, I suppose it was a perfect storm of, you know, overseas recruitment. You know, so lowering those vacancies, lowering perm vacancies as well, but overseas recruitment, huge cost. You know, you know, when you had all those nurse vacancies, you know, we did a similar thing over at Elysium. There was a perfect storm of all that. But it was a way to completely have that. You know, have that transparency in their staffing, and you can see exactly where those benefits were. And it's huge. You know, the system works. I mean, you know, without a shadow of a doubt, the system works, and it works very well.
But I think it's important, isn't it? Because there's no one system out there that fixes everything.
No.
But when you've got lots of moving parts, which we will dig into in the next episode and future conversations, because to manage your workforce flexibly, sustainably is probably the key buzzword, isn't it? You do need to have lots of fixes along the way, but having something that gives you the control, the safety as well. I mean, using Temployer, you don't miss shifts then, do you? There's
no. I mean, we must probably operate a 95% fill rate across our system.
And how does that compare to normal life without Temployer? Do you know?
To be fair, I never really looked at the comparisons. I mean, I know a lot of neutral vend solutions don't achieve close to that. You know, I've had some, you know, financial directors of care companies quote me at about 60-65% fill rate. I think as well, you know, what you have is, you know, a lot of the data skewed with that as well, because I think, you know, a lot of companies that are using neutral vends are still going outside to sort of their own agencies on a locality basis, just because, like I said, you know, those local agencies aren't willing to come down to the costs that are being you know, mooted about by those neutral vends. So our fill rate, you know, is currently operating at about 95%. You know, but I think you said it yourself. You know, I think it's so key to have a bit of everything in there. You know, you want your perm staff. You want to get your perm staff to do more shifts as well. You know, from an overtime perspective, you know, we can work with you on those kind of things. You know, how do you do that? You know, does it go? You know, do you move them to weekly pay for their overtime? Again, because you're tracking their hours through Temployer, you know, we can create reports for you that are going to show you Joe Bloggs actually did this amount of overtime. That can go straight to payroll on a weekly basis. They can get paid that on a weekly basis instead of, you know, I think sometimes with these companies, you know, somebody does overtime this week. You know, if they're at end of payroll cutoff, they're not going to get paid that for 6 weeks. You know, so we can facilitate all those kind of, you know, that data.
Well, because with agencies, they will pay weekly, won't they?
Exactly.
That's a big reason they keep them.
And you do have a lot of people that are working full-time in one place, but then working for an agency to supplement that income because they get that on a weekly basis. So, we can certainly provide that data, the dashboards, you know, the clarity that those shifts are being worked. For you to, you know, make the right choices for your business.
Got you. So we've basically established that the importance of having flexibility in your workforce in a healthcare organisation, and the importance of agency being part of that mix, but having control over it, of the compliance and all the rest of it. We talked about the benefits of having a tech solution, not a tech solution, having Temployer, but a tech solution such as Temployer, benefits for employees, which is in terms of it's an actual employee benefit, being able to take those shifts, being able to have them the priority order, the benefits for agencies and then for the company overall. we've talked about the importance of integration.
Yep,
So how you're
very
integrating things in. You've been really honest about that. You know, again, if you were saying now going, yeah, every integration is that easy. Anybody listening to that who knows about integration would go, wow, I'm going to turn that off then. But you haven't, and I think that the fact that you have that discovery call, the fact that you go on, try it, but you'll put the work in to understand that, and also the value that you can add back to the overall kind of resourcing strategy of an organisation. Yeah, it is absolutely brilliant. And we've also teed up the next episode, because the next episode is with Signet Group.
Yep.
How long have they been using the system for?
They've been using the system now for about 3.5 years.
About 3.5 years. So well embedded. Do they use it across the whole organisation?
Across the whole organisation, fully embedded, fully embraced.
Yeah.
And we've got a great working relationship with them.
Yeah.
We've, and I don't mind saying it here, a lot of the stuff we talked about, for example, the compliance elements, certainly the compliance element, really, we built with them.
Yeah.
It was, they were using our system. They wanted to sort of make those changes, and we went ahead and I think that's the key thing about the Temployer system that we've not really mentioned. Temployer system, when I first started using it all the way back when I was at Four Seasons Healthcare, it was an agency. Temployer recruited into the system their own bank workers, their own workers, and then you could, as a provider, could have access to them for a fee. There are similar companies out there that do that now, but then when I took it to Elysium, we completely revamped it. We took away any agency element of that system, and we made it a workforce management piece of tech to manage flexible workforce. So Elysium were a big part of us making some of those changes, and it's because of the use of Elysium that the system became what it became. Signet took us to that next level. So this isn't something that's been developed, by tech people, all the way in Finland, which is, where our business is based, that have no idea about staffing. This system has massively been developed by people using it every day. And I would question that there's not many systems out there that have been built in that same way.
I love that. And again, start this conversation, I kind of highlighted that, is that there's a lot of solutions that are out there that have been built to solve things, but without actually finding out truly what the problems are. And unless you've kind of lived and breathed those problems, I think it's difficult to really know that. And I think the fact that it's not just been built through one client. So there's a lot of tech solutions out there that have been built on one client, but you're actually on a journey, and it'd be really interesting to know what's next. Are there any kind of next developments? Is there anything that is very exciting on the horizon?
So I think the sort of key thing there really is our e-roster. So our tech's been used. It's been used sort of in many sort of sites. But there's always that thing, isn't it? When a shift comes in as filled, whether it's filled by an agency worker, whether it's filled by a bank, a perm, whatever else, it comes in as an email, and then you'll go and manually update that into your roster. Whereas now what we've done is we've created an e-roster that can bolt onto the front of that, fully modular. So you can choose what you use and what you don't use. But what that does, it just has everything. Again, it's that interoperability. It's that cohesion. It just all works. It all works together. So, we are currently in our first client with that piece of tech. Again, they're acting as the as the Elysium, the Signet for that piece of tech, to be able to help us make sure it's fit for purpose for the market as a whole. But you've got everything in there. You've got your rosters. Again, it's been built very, very simply for the private healthcare sector. You've got time and attendance, geofencing, clock-ins on there, and more importantly, you've got the backing of the Temployer tech at the back end of it to be able to manage multiple banks, to be able to manage shared banks, to be able to manage your agency communications and stuff, which weirdly enough is something that just doesn't exist with these other pieces of these other e-rosters. They don't have that. The amount of companies I've spoken to, like, we use this e-roster, but we want to use the Temployer tech to manage our our bank. Well, does your current e-roster not do that? Oh no, you can't do that. You can send it out as an email, but there's no access to them from an app perspective. So all of that is just going to be coming under one roof. So we're really, really excited about that. And also as well, on top of that, what we're also doing is we're working with the agencies.
Yep.
So, we give access to our system for agencies to obviously be able to fill their shifts with our clients. But now what we're doing is we're going to develop that system as well. So we're going to make that a better system for agencies, because that, we want to make sure that they have the best possible chance of filling shifts, whether it be with our clients or with their own clients. But again, holding that compliance in the system, being able to send that compliance across to their clients. So all of this is, all interconnected, and hopefully it works well for the business as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been a really good chat, and the thing is, Engaged Care Talent is about changing, kind of raising awareness of changing things in talent attraction, and the way that in healthcare and social care, what's done now and what needs to be done for the future. And this definitely feels like a really good fit. If I was listening to, if any companies are listening to this, how do they find out more? There's a bit of a plug, but what is the best way of getting into you, setting up that discovery call? And it's great what you're saying, but again, people want to see it, don't they? Want to feel it, what it looks like. So how do you do that?
Yeah, a couple of ways really. First of all, find me on LinkedIn. So Ben Benhafsi. You won't miss this face on there. And then of course our website, which is www.temployer.co.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Ben, it's been nice talking to you, and I really look forward to the next episode, getting Signet guys on and bringing to life the case study and telling people what the real benefits are of this firsthand.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much. Cheers.